So, welcome to episode 35 of the For All That podcast. And this week we're joined by a couple of our more regular guests. We've got Jamie Maxwell back on. How's it going, Jamie?
Very well, thanks, Michael. How are you?
Not too bad. And we've got Kate Higgins back on. How's it going, Kate?
It's fine, thank you. Thanks for asking me back on.
No problem. And Andrew, torn away from the PhD thesis thing. How's it going?
Yes, I'm fine. I'm quite sane at the minute. I'm happy to say.
Well, I'm not because we're having technical problems, but there you go. So I think our first subject this week, something that we've not really brought up too much on the podcast, which is Catalonia. And Jamie's been over there. How did it go, Jamie? What did you find out about the situation over there? And do you think there are any parallels with what's going on in Scotland, or is it a completely different situation?
Well, I travelled over to Barcelona last Sunday. I spent 6 days there, flying back pretty late on Friday night. It was a fascinating excursion. I met with a number of Catalan activists and politicians and writers, most of whom supported independence. And on Wednesday, there was an enormous demonstration in favour of Catalan independence. The regional government said that 1.6 million people had joined hands from the top of Catalonia to the south. It must be one of the biggest demonstrations in history, really. It was quite extraordinary. And I went to Sagrada Familia and watched proceedings from there. And I suppose the most obvious contrast between the Catalan and Scottish independence movements is the Catalan independence movement is genuinely a grassroots movement. The shift in Catalan opinion over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, starting perhaps from 2010 when the Spanish Supreme Court struck down the Catalan Statute of Autonomy, which was just asserting Catalonia's right to determine its own future. Since then, many Catalans, 55% or above now, say they really can't trust Spain anymore. A line was crossed, and they no longer feel as though they can secure concessions in terms of greater self-government from the central authorities in Madrid. Whereas in Scotland, I suppose what we have is an independence movement led by a political party with a reluctant public. And yeah, that was an eye-opener for me, because I hadn't imagined that independence movements could be mass movements. I suppose just having that distinctively Scottish experience.
Yeah, Jamie, one thing I wanted to ask, because I'm not well versed in the Catalan experience at all, but one thing which is quite interesting about the experience in Scotland that we're having, and I'm always explaining this to people, is the fact that our nationalist demands are primarily at the moment articulated in terms of governance, in terms of power, and not so much in terms of culture or identity. I wonder, when you were in Catalonia, what kind of balance between these different sort of potential forces of nationalism did you find?
There's a much greater stress in Catalonia on cultural and linguistic factors. And that's because the Catalans feel as though their culture is under siege, partly due to historical memory as well of Francoism. And Franco went to great lengths to try and stamp out all signs of Catalan culture. So the Catalans do have obviously also they have a distinct language, and the Catalans get upset if you elide Spanish and Catalan. They don't think that Catalan is a derivative in any sense of Spanish. They say it's a distinct language with its own distinct origin. And also, Scotland is immediately recognisable as a nation in the world stage. Catalonia is not. People don't naturally think of Catalonia as a distinct and separate nation in its own right. They think of it as one region among many in Spain, if they think of it at all. So Catalans are very keen to stress cultural and linguistic motivation. At the same time, they make very similar arguments. Catalan nationalists make very similar arguments to Scottish nationalists. They say we contribute more than we get back, and we contribute more in tax than we get back in public expenditure. We're badly run, and the Catalan state can't be reformed. So there's a greater stress on cultural factors, but it's not exclusively cultural.
A couple of people I've spoken to about this have said that someone that lives in Spain actually told me that it's almost a sort of powder keg situation there at the moment. I don't mean to exaggerate anything like that, but did you feel that there was a lot of nervousness? Did you feel there was sort of aggression in the air, or did it seem quite good-natured?
No, the whole thing felt very good-natured, but I think that sort of sense of excitement and enthusiasm disguises a resolution, a sense of resolution. People, not politicians, are absolutely clear that they want a separate and distinct state. The political class, on the other hand, is ambivalent. I don't see any real threat of Spanish military intervention. The issue was raised once or twice when I was there, but it would be catastrophic for Spain's international reputation. It would be terminal for Spain's international reputation. And I think most Catalans, although they see the Spanish state as profoundly belligerent and aggressive and working to try and suppress Catalan's national identity, they don't think that it's so desperate that it would do something as crazy as send the tanks into Barcelona.
A few of the statements I've read from Spanish government ministers have been very belligerent indeed, but you think it might be just kind of sabre rattling to try and sort of scare people?
It's a sign of a state in decline and in crisis. There are so many other things going on in Spain. You have the economic crisis, which is incredibly severe. Mariano Rajoy's Conservative government is embroiled in a corruption scandal. I believe there's some sort of corruption scandal going on in the Socialist Party as well. So that, I think, accounts for a lot of the defensiveness that the Spanish central authorities have displayed in recent years, with regards not just to Catalonia but to Gibraltar as well. But Catalonia is particularly important to Spain because it really is a net fiscal contributor, and the Spanish state's in so much debt as it is that to lose an economic asset such as Catalonia, one of the most developed, if not I think the most industrially developed parts of Spain, would be pretty serious.
Do you think there's any kind of advantage in Scotland allying itself with other independence movements around the world? In Europe, there's Catalonia, there's also you could talk about the Basque region, you could talk about parts of Belgium, parts of Holland, even parts of France. There's different movements all around, obviously Wales as well. Do you think there's an advantage in allying ourselves with these groups, or is Scotland a separate case and should be considered as such?
Well, I think all cases are separate and should be considered as such. But the SNP in recent years has been very cautious about displaying its connections to Catalonia, which are really quite extensive in public, for two reasons. First of all, it doesn't want to upset Madrid, which has intimated it might block an independent Scotland's accession to the EU. Secondly, because Madrid is so intransigent in the face of Catalan calls for greater autonomy or for at least a referendum on independence, because they just won't allow that to happen, the Catalan Parliament at some stage might be forced to declare Catalonia's independence unilaterally. And that's the last thing the SNP wants to be associated with. The Scottish Government has put huge stress on the sort of strictly legal nature of the Scottish referendum process. So I think from an SNP's perspective, it's better to keep a certain distance between Scotland and Catalonia. In terms of grassroots independence movements, I think I was writing about this in the Herald today. The relationship between the Scottish and Catalan independence movements at the grassroots level is really quite strong, and it's growing. RIC in particular, the Radical Independence Convention in particular, has in fact, Jonathan Shaftly has travelled to Barcelona to establish a Catalan equivalent. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing as long as ideologically you're on the same level, and I think the Scottish and Catalan independence movements probably are, then I can't see that it would be a bad thing.
Kate, what do you think? Do you think that the Scottish independence movement should be allying itself with other places?
Cool. I can see tactically why, for the reasons that Jamie outlined, why the SNP and the Scottish Government have been much more cautious in the last year or so about aligning ourselves with other independence movements. But over the piece of 20 or so years or more that I've been kind of active in and around the SNP, there's been a lot of fraternal and other visits and exchanges between various movements actually, and quite a bit of an exchange over time. It is a bit of a tightrope around the whole kind of international diplomacy of it, particularly given Madrid's stance and also what the European Commissioner has had to say about the prospect of an independent Scotland joining the EU, but that was entirely playing to a domestic audience. And I think, and I know it's always difficult to get traction in the mainstream media on some of the finer points and details, and again, it's a balance of that, because they had to kind of not be seen to rubbish an international diplomat But at the same time, I do think more could be made of the fact that actually he wasn't really talking to us. He was talking back to the domestic audience in Spain about the hard line they would take on this because of the implications potentially for Catalonia. I mean, I'm also struck as well by what Jamie was saying around how this is an entirely a people-driven movement and a lukewarm reception from the political class. And it's almost the converse, or if you like, of what's happened in Scotland, as Jamie outlined. But it's also a remarkable turnaround in Catalonian fortunes because I was there. I remember being there about 10 years ago in Barcelona on holiday and mooching about Las Ramblas as you do. And there was this one table with three old veterans of the Catalan independence movement with their leaflets and their badges and their stickers and all the rest of it. And we went up to them and chatted to them and explained, that I was an SNP and we swapped badges and it was lovely. It was really nice. But everybody was just wandering past them and ignoring them. And as well as what Jamie was saying around that seminal moment in 2010, there's also been the issue of the impact of recession. And I think the economic meltdown in Spain has sparked the whole movement to life, as well as the sense of grievance in that Catalonia is too big to be allowed to go on its own, and why should they be bailing out the other parts of Spain? And I do wonder if that's a factor in why we haven't had this groundswell of pro-independence feeling in Scotland, or certainly not to a kind of overt extent that there is in Catalonia, because we haven't really suffered financially since 2008 the way the Catalans and another kind of nation or potential nation states have. And also I think there's something to be said about the culture and identity thing, in that it's always been there or thereabouts in Scotland, but we've not really made enough of the I suppose us having a distinct culture and identity. We've allowed the seepage of adoption of other cultures and as all being one culture to kind of carry on apace. And I wonder again if that, in hindsight, might be a bit of a mistake not to have made more of holding on and promoting more of our own culture and identity.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard from various people in the campaign that, this is the moment for arguments from the head, but there'll be arguments from the heart coming in the next year. I suppose you could consider it in that way. Arguments about culture, that would come under the umbrella of, argument from the heart. But Andrew, can I just go to you for a second there on the same kind of question? Do you think it's a good idea for Scotland to ally itself with other independence movements around the world?
I think it depends. For me, the ideological question is absolutely critical. I mean, simply because one shares a desire for autonomy for a particular group of people in a particular space doesn't mean that you're natural bedfellows. I mean, I don't want to see us marching alongside right-wing racists or any of that kind of thing. I mean, that should be self-evident, I would have thought. But in some ways, I think there's an interesting thing here, which is saying that we're all in the same fight. We're all in a kind of, or a similar fight at least. And I don't know if that's really the case, so I don't know how useful it is. I mean, certainly I was really interested to hear what Jamie was saying, because despite being a tragic political obsessive and very much interested in our constitutional conundrums and reasons, I actually know very little, relatively speaking, about what goes on in Quebec, say, and certainly my Canadian friends have a lot of kind of question marks against Quebec nationalism and its articulations, and I'm equally kind of ignorant about what goes on in Barcelona too. So on a kind of personal basis, I suppose, I don't immediately see a very strong affinity. But there's an interesting other point, I think, which is that we should be remarking on the fact that the Scottish independence struggle is remarkably peaceful. I mean, the idea that you break up a union, it will cause partly civil war in America, and it's important not to be too flippant about these kind of things. In many countries,